The baby cried first. Thin, rasping, a sound too small to fill the dry air, yet it carried across the street like a wound. The mother stumbled forward, her face pale as bone, her dress torn and sun-bleached. Dust clung to her like a second skin. She clutched the swaddled bundle tighter against her chest as she reached the rancher's door. Her knuckles struck wood. Once, twice. No answer. The wind hissed along the street, pushing grit into her eyes. She hit harder. Please, bread. I'll trade. I'll give. Her words caught in her throat. She pressed the child forward as though the act itself was shame enough. Take him. Just bread. The door opened. The rancher filled the frame, shoulders dark against the dying sun. His face was carved stone, unreadable. He looked at the woman, then at the bundle squirming in her arms. No sound passed his lips. She trembled, holding the infant out. Please. The rancher's hand moved slow as dusk. He lifted the baby with a steadiness that made the mother's knees buckle. Then he reached inside, came back with a half-loaf, rough and cracked from the hearth. He pressed it into her hands without a word. The door shut. Silence returned, except for the woman's sob. She sank to the dirt, clutching the bread as though it were gold, her arms empty, her soul emptier still. From the saloon porch, two men whispered over their whiskey. One spat into the dust. Heartless bastard. Another shook his head. No, too quiet, that one. Never know what silence hides. The baby's wail faded behind the rancher's door, muffled by timber walls. Inside, no one could see what was done or why. The widow stood at the edge of the street, her shawl pulled tight though the heat pressed heavy. Her eyes followed the scene with no outward show of feeling. She had watched enough loss to know its shape, yet something in the rancher's silence unsettled her more than the woman's plea. The town breathed shallow that night. Lanterns lit early, doors bolted, voices hushed. Mothers held their children tighter. Men eyed the rancher's land with suspicion. Rumor spread quicker than wildfire through chaparral. How a starving woman had given her flesh and blood for bread, and how the rancher had taken both without so much as a word. By morning, the tale would stretch beyond the town, carried by riders and drifters, told in saloons over spilled liquor. Some would curse the rancher as cruel. Others would mutter that only a man with ghosts heavier than the desert sun could keep such silence. And the widow, standing in shadow, knew the story was not finished. Something old, something dangerous had just been set in motion. The shovel struck stone. Sparks bit her palms through the worn handle, and the widow cursed under her breath. The ground was hard, sun-baked, refusing the blade. She set her jaw, pressed harder, the metal ringing like iron bells against the canyon silence. Behind her, the wind dragged red dust across the broken homestead. Boards groaned in the heat. Chickens scratched at nothing. A grave marker leaned crooked, her husband's name fading where the sun had bleached the letters white. She never looked long at it. She lifted the shovel again. Dust clung to the sweat on her neck. One strike, then another. The widow's arms burned, but she worked without pause, because work meant not listening to the whispers floating down from town. At the saloon, the whispers thickened like smoke. Cards slapped wood, whiskey splashed glass, but voices carried the same bitter story, how the rancher had taken both baby and bread. He ain't right, muttered a ranch hand, slamming his cup. Quiet devils like him always got blood trailing behind, another said. A third leaned close, eyes darting. Word is men are coming. Many crossed years back. The piano stilled. Chairs scraped. Every ear leaned toward that sentence. The widow entered then, dust on her skirts, hands raw from the shovel. The room shifted. Men looked, but did not greet her. She walked to the counter, laid down 2 coins, and asked for flour. Her voice was flat, steady, carrying no more than it had to. Behind her, the talk resumed in murmurs. Outlaws. A grudge older than the canyon. A debt written in lead and fire. The barkeep slid the flour across. Best keep your doors barred, ma'am. She nodded once, no more. Lifted the sack, turned left. Outside, the street sagged beneath the weight of heat and fear. The widow's boots pressed prints into dust that wind erased behind her. She did not look toward the rancher's land, though she felt the pull of it. She walked past, her shawl drawn close, her jaws set against the voices chasing her steps. By the time the sun bled into the horizon, shadows stretched long over the canyon's rim. The widow sat by her fire, knife flashing as it pared thin curls of wood. She stacked them, steady hands moving with quiet purpose. Each curl dropped like a whisper of preparation. From the darkness, coyotes howled. From the town, faint and carried on the night wind, the saloon doors banged open, followed by a single word spat loud enough to echo. Outlaws. The widow's blade paused mid-stroke. Her eyes lifted to the canyon's edge, where the sky burned crimson and black. She said nothing. She did not need to. The silence around her tightened like a noose. Hoofbeats split the night. 6 riders, black against the blood-red moon, thundered across the plain with dust boiling behind them. Spurs clinked, rifles gleamed, voices rough with drink and hate. In town, lanterns dimmed, curtains dropped. A child's cry was smothered beneath a mother's hand. The saloon emptied into silence as the riders drew near, the sound of hooves rolling down the main road like drums of war. The widow stood in her doorway, shawl drawn, knife still in her grip. Her eyes fixed on the horizon where the riders swelled larger, their shadows dragging long across the sand. The air carried the stench of leather, sweat, and smoke. The first outlaw spat into the dust as he dismounted. His boots hit the ground heavy. "Bring him out," he roared, voice cracking against the hollow street. "Bring out the rancher, or we burn this hole to the ground." No door opened. No one stepped forward. Another rider laughed, sharp and mean. He swung a lantern post with the butt of his rifle, glass shattering, flame hissing out. The darkness grew thicker, pressing close. The rancher's door creaked. A shadow filled the frame. He stood there, broad and unmoving, the baby's muffled cry spilling faint from behind him. His face was unreadable as stone. He said nothing. The gang leader sneered. "That all you got, old man?" Silence. He raised his pistol, pointing it at the child's cry beyond the door. The widow moved, quiet, deliberate, stepping out from her doorway. Dust swirled around her boots. The outlaws turned, sneering at the sight of a thin woman wrapped in shadows. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her hand rested steady on the knife at her side, her eyes fixed not on them, but on the angle of their rifles, the twitch of their shoulders, the spaces between their words. The gang laughed, low and cruel. "Look here, boys. Widow thinks she's got claws." But their laughter faltered. Her gaze did not waver. And it was no fear, no tremble, no softness. Only the stillness of a canyon before it swallows a rider whole. The leader barked, masking unease. "Stay out of this, woman. This ain't your fight." Still she stood, the firelight from a nearby lamp catching on the edge of her blade, glinting once, then gone. Behind her, the night deepened. The town held its breath. Coyotes howled across the ridge. The baby cried louder. The sound struck sharper than a bullet. The outlaw's pistol cocked. The widow stepped forward, her shadow stretching across the dust. And for the first time, the silence cracked. The pistol fired. The shot split the night, ringing off canyon walls. The bullet bit into timber just inches from the baby's cry. Smoke curled from the outlaw's barrel. The widow was already moving. Her knife flashed, striking the leader's wrist. The gun clattered to the dirt, his curse spilling after it. She pivoted, low and sharp, like a shadow breaking free of stone. The gang roared, rifles snapping to shoulders. But the widow's hands were quicker, steady as if time itself slowed to her will. From beneath her shawl came a rifle, old, worn, but polished clean, the metal kissed by careful hands. She leveled it with the calm of one who had aimed before, far from this street, in battles most here never knew. The first outlaw fell. A single crack, sharp and final, dropping him into the dust. The others hesitated, shock trembling through their boots. This was no grieving widow. This was a soldier, a hunter of men. "Take her," one shouted. But the words carried no weight. She fired again, the second man spinning into the dirt, his rifle firing wild into the night. The rancher never moved, still as a mountain, the baby's cries pressing against the silence. His eyes, dark and unreadable, watched the widow carve justice with fire and steel. The outlaws scattered, diving for cover behind troughs, wagons, splintered posts. Bullets screamed through the air, splinters flying. The widow shifted, low behind a barrel, her breath steady, her aim truer than theirs. Another shot cracked, and a third outlaw slammed back, choking on dust and blood. The survivors cursed, fear gnawing at the edges of their bravado. "She's a ghost." One spat, reloading with trembling hands. She rose then, rifle braced, blade gleaming in her other hand. Her eyes caught the lamplight, hard, unbroken, the eyes of sharpshooter who once walked battlefields where silence meant survival. Another fell, then another. The last outlaw stood alone, pistol shaking, teeth bared in a grin, more fear than fury. "You ain't talking me," he growled, stepping back toward his horse. The widow said nothing. Her rifle spoke. The shot threw him to the dust, his hand clawing skyward before stillness claimed him. Silence swallowed the street. Smoke drifted. The baby's wail carried through it like a fragile hymn. The widow lowered her rifle, her hands steady, her breath even. Around her, townsfolk peeked from doors, their faces pale with awe. They whispered what they had seen, what they would tell again and again. The rancher turned at last, stepping back into his house. When he returned, the child was in his arms, pressed to his chest with a tenderness no words could explain. His silence was no longer cruelty, but burden, the weight of loss, carried alone until this night. The widow stood in the center of the street, her shadow long in the moonlight. The canyon winds carried her name, low and endless. And the storyteller's voice, old and cracked, closed the tale. So it was when death came riding, a widow with nothing rose and became legend. They whisper her still, out where the desert keeps its secrets, where silence is not weakness but steel.